Now then, private sector credit growth in Kenya did start to contract in June. And if August's figure of less than 6% annual growth is anything to go by, that trend hasn't changed yet. And it does paint a very gloomy picture. That said, a clearer image of exactly how Kenya's banks have been affected will emerge this week as half-year results start to roll in. But exactly how will mobile lending by some of the biggest players in that space, Commercial Bank of Africa and KCB, Kenya Commercial Bank, be affected? That's a question I put to Safaricom CEO earlier today. Our conversation started, however, by asking him if growth in voice revenues is over and done with.
Last year we added about 1.5 million, and those people are going to make voice calls. The thing is, they're not going to make as many voice calls as the customers who've been online for longer. But I think we'll still see a modest growth in voice in years to come.
So are we, based on the data that you're looking at from your clients, are we seeing a sort of like-for-like substitution, especially in terms of calling patterns? Because it's one thing to say, I will call someone on, conventional GSM, but now you've got your OTT service providers, your Telegrams, your WhatsApp and so on, and even Facebook, which are providing voice calls on data. And we see your data revenue going up, but is that necessarily a direct substitution for voice?
Yeah, so if you look at the people who are using WhatsApp voice, they're more than compensating by increased use of data by the same customers. So, we're not really worried about it.
Financial inclusion, that does remain a key focus for your business as a whole. And you did some interesting things there, scrapping some of the fees for really low denominated transactions. But let's start with the banking side of it, because 2016 has been a crazy year for banking. Are you concerned about your exposure to banks? I'm
more concerned about the bank's exposure because the current rate, whilst we've seen a massive uplift in lending,
and that's from September onwards?
That's from September onwards.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure about the profitability. I mean, not for us, because actually, if you look at the total numbers, it represents less than 1% of our overall revenue. So that's not a big deal. But I'm concerned about the long-term viability on these products if it ceases to be profitable for the banks involved. Now, a couple of things that feeds into the profitability for the banks is non-performing loans, because these are unsecured loans. And I think both banks will be announcing their Q3 results this week, so I don't want to preempt that. But we have seen a kind of massive uplift. So between them, there's probably 150,000 loans or more a day, which is massive. But if it's not profitable, then I think there'll be a problem.
How do you expect this to play out? Because we've got an election coming up in less than 10 months, right? And this particular piece of legislation, from one perspective, is very convenient politically. Might not make sense in terms of straight out economics, but politically it's extremely convenient. So you can bet that it will at least be enforced for at least the next year.
I think there's some unintended consequences from this legislation, and you're seeing a lot of investors approaching Kenya in a more cautious way. And they're saying, we didn't think that Kenya was into price control. But if you've price controlled energy, and now you're price controlling banking, we're not sure that this is a safe haven for our investment. I think in terms of the product itself, on the run up to the election and beyond, I'm hoping it continues to be there, because what's important is the deepening financial inclusion, which matters more than the politics behind it.
All these red flags you're seeing popping up in data, starting with that broad slowdown in lending between June and August. The data you're referring to indicates that from September, we've seen an increase in lending, but in aggregate, that data from the third quarter of the year does seem to suggest some sort of broad economic slowdown.
I think we just need to be a little bit careful, reflecting on my statement earlier about the increase in lending. These are micro loans. These are small loans. Yeah. But if you're a small business, my wife is running a small business. If she wanted to borrow money, that's not something that she'll borrow from KCB M-Pesa. So if the loan is unsecured, the banks are not going to lend her the money, and so that will force her into the informal sector. It'll force her into the microfinances, and it'll force her into the the so-called Shylocks, if you use that broad term.
Yeah.
And for sure, they don't charge you 14%. They charge you a lot more. And so it's not surprising that we're seeing a slowdown, because the banks will take a much more cautious approach.